Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar at Statistics Solutions. My name is Justin D'Souza. I'm a quantitative specialist here at the company. During today's webinar, we are going to look at quantitative defense and how to prepare for the defense, a proposal defense or a final defense. A lot of what we'll discuss will transfer to a qualitative study as well, or mixed methods. But we will be looking more specifically at statistics. So a lot of this is focused on quant. We're going to send everyone a copy of the webinar as well as a copy of the PowerPoint. If you have any questions, you can type them into the chat box or the Q&A box, and we will do a Q&A session at the end. My colleague Sierra is on here as well, and she will be putting some hyperlinks into the chat box and the Q&A box for scheduling consultations and checking out our free dissertation resources. Let's dive in. First, I'll give a brief overview of what we provide at our company in terms of services. Then we will look at defense preparation, looking at a couple examples and what types of headings and different slides you should use. And then we'll conclude with a summary and a Q&A session. On this slide, you can see all the various parts of the dissertation that we assist with. Our company has quantitative specialists, statisticians, we have qualitative specialists, and we have literature review specialists. So no matter where you are in the process, if you're at topic development or trying to frame your research questions or trying to find a gap in the literature, we can assist you there. We can help frame your methodology, pinpoint a research design, calculate minimum sample size targets for your research, indicate what is the best analysis to address your research questions. And then once you're completed with the proposal, we do assist with the results chapter, both quantitative and qualitative results. And we help with the discussion, PowerPoints for proposal and final defenses, which is what we're discussing today, and journal publications. So if you have any questions, you can give us a call at 727-442-4290. On this slide, you can see the current webinars that we're doing, and then you can also see the webinars that we've done in the past, and you can view the recordings at the webinar archive link. And here we are for today's topic. So we're discussing defenses. Many schools do a proposal and a final defense. Some schools will only do a final defense, so it kind of depends what school you go to. Usually a proposal defense involves looking at your first 3 chapters, following a standard 3-chapter, or rather a 5-chapter dissertation. So the proposal contains the introduction, the lit review, and the methodology. So during the proposal defense, you want to summarize these particular chapters. So you need to justify, why is this study being conducted? What are you contributing that no one else has done before? Because that's the gap in the literature. Then you need to explain with a high level of detail the methodology for your proposed study. Are you doing a correlational study, experimental study? Who are you targeting? What instruments are you using? Are you using archival data or maybe a self-report survey? And then what analyses are you planning to run to address your research plan? So that's the proposal defense. The final defense contains the same information, but you now need to add the results and the discussion piece. So you need to shift the proposal chapter information, intro, review, and methods, need to be condensed for your final dissertation defense. And then you need to add the results and discussion piece. And then, you need to discuss what the results, how do they align with current literature, previous literature, were the findings what you expected, and what can future studies look to examine. In terms of preparation, the best advice I can give is look for a template at your school. Most universities have a PowerPoint template that you can follow, or you can ask your committee for approved examples. Your methodologist or your chair, You can ask for a previous PowerPoint that they have worked on, that they have been a committee on. And then you can kind of just follow that template for your own presentation. You'll want to identify if there's a minimum or maximum slide count. Okay, I tend to see between 20 and 30 slides is usually the sweet spot for both proposal and final defenses, and usually somewhere around 30 minutes for the whole presentation. And you have to leave time for questions at the end. So 30 minutes for strictly the presentation, and then questions can usually be 15 to 20 minutes. So you want to ask your committee ahead of time, what types of questions can you anticipate? I would suggest sending the entire PowerPoint ahead of time to your committee so they can take a look at it and provide some feedback. Identify when the questions are going to be asked. Is it going to be during the presentation or after? After would definitely be preferable. So you're not tripped up with a question in the middle of the presentation. Then you need to pinpoint your location. Are you going to do the presentation remotely through Zoom, Microsoft Teams, or Google Meet, or are you planning to give the dissertation defense in person? So obviously, I would say doing it remotely gives you a large advantage in that you can print out your entire dissertation, you can have 2 or 3 monitors set up, you can have all your talking points laid out. You can have, I'd say 2 monitors here. If you could have 3 monitors, that would be even better. You can have your presentation on one screen, you can have your dissertation on a second screen, and you can have your talking points on a third screen. But there are still some universities that do the presentation in person. So if you are doing that, you might want to have note cards or just have your talking points on the slides themselves, potentially. You can add notes to the bottom of slides right here. And if you're doing it in person, then you need to be familiar with the equipment that you're planning to use, a projector, USB, or HDMI cables. And if you're using PowerPoint or another type of presentation software. This is the sample template that I see for a proposal and a final defense. This is really a final defense because it has the results sections in here. So you can see problem statement, purpose statement, all the way down through data analysis process. That is the methodology, or that's your proposal defense. The final defense incorporates these last 2 bullet points. In terms of the method slides, what do you need to present? These are the most important things, I would say. You need to present your research questions and hypotheses. Then justify your research design. A lot of the methods comes down to justifying the decisions that you're making. So if you picked a quantitative correlational design, you need to have a definition ready to explain that. Why did you select a quantitative method as opposed to qualitative? Why did you select a correlational design as opposed to an experimental design? So have definitions ready to go. Then you will define your population and sample. Think big picture. Who are you trying to generalize the findings to? That will be your population. And then how is the subset of the population derived? How is the sample gathered? So within that section, you'll want to provide a sample size estimate. You can use G-Power or a sample size calculator to identify, hey, these are the minimum number of participants I need to target for my study. Then you go into data collection procedures. So think of this like a recipe from step A to step Z. How can someone else replicate your study just by reading the data collection procedures? So thinking about, you need IRB permissions first. Do you need permissions to use the surveys that you're administering? Are you giving a demographic questionnaire to collect gender, age, ethnicity, things like that? And then discussing the actual collection for your data. Are you doing a pre-test, post-test? Are you just administering the data or the survey at one point in time? Do you need consent? Questions like that. And then you go into the instrumentation and the archival data. How did you arrive at the particular instrument or survey that you're planning to use? Is it previously validated? Is it reliable? If you're making your own tool, if you're planning to develop your own tool, are you running a pilot study? How are you proving that it's going to be valid and reliable? And then the other side of it could be archival data. If you're not giving a survey, maybe you're using data that already exists on the internet, then explain the archival data step. Where are you gathering it? How can we trust that it's accurate? And then the final component of the proposal defense is describing your data analysis procedures. How is each research question going to be analyzed statistically? Okay, so you can talk about the software that you're planning to use, maybe SPSS or Stata or R, and then go into what you're going to present. Are you looking at demographics? Are you going to run linear regressions, correlations, ANOVAs, that sort of thing? So that's the proposal defense. What do you present on the result slides for the final defense? The first thing I tend to do is I'll just copy and paste the entire demographic table into the presentation. That way you don't really need bullet points to describe every demographic. You just have the table in there and you can describe the table. Then you want to present descriptive statistics for your variables of interest. So whatever variables were part of your research questions, you'll want to give the sample size, the mean or the average, the standard deviation, and Cronbach alpha if you did measure reliability. Then you can briefly, it's the key word, you can briefly discuss the statistical assumptions. Okay, so every inferential analysis tends to have assumptions that you need to verify. Normality, linearity, homoscedasticity, outliers. So you'll want to touch on that in the defense. Don't go into too high level detail about assumptions. You just want to touch on it and summarize, was the assumption supported or was it not? And if the assumption was not supported, what are you planning to do to remedy that issue? Then you go into your hypotheses or your research questions one by one. I would say 1 to 2 slides per hypothesis. Summarize the key takeaways, giving test statistics like t-tests, f-tests, giving the mean scores and beta values if you're doing regressions, and giving the p-value. So the p-value tells us, did we have a significant relationship or a significant difference or not? And then you want to conclude with a definitive statement for whether your hypothesis was supported or not supported. That final bullet point, that's a very strong conclusion. Was it supported or was it not? So yeah, that pretty much covers the presentation. I have some examples here that we can look at. The first one here is a proposal defense. And this is at GCU. Okay, so I am using a GCU template here, and this was for a proposal defense. I'll briefly go through these introductory slides. I won't go into depth, but you can see we have the intro, we have the background and the gap in the literature. Then we go into the theoretical and conceptual framework. You might only have one of those. You might only have a theoretical framework. I tend to see conceptual as more for qualitative studies. If you have a theoretical or conceptual model, you can just copy and paste that into the presentation itself. Then we go into the problem statement. And you can see this person put talking points at the bottom of the slides. Problem statement, the purpose statement, the research questions and hypotheses. Then we go into the methodology. Okay, so this is justifying why did we select a quantitative method? Why did we select a quasi-experimental design? And I think this is a useful table to include in the presentation where you identify all the variables of interest in your study. Is the variable independent or is it a dependent variable? What is it being measured by? Is it a demographic survey? Is it a particular instrument? This one was the epoch, a very specific instrument. And what is the measurement level? Is it nominal or categorical, or is it interval or continuous? Then you go into population and sample. Okay, so define the population, give a sample size estimate based on a power analysis, discuss the specific sampling procedure that you're planning to use. It could be random sampling or snowball sampling. And then discussing recruitment and ethical considerations. Then going into the survey instruments. The first instrument was a demographic questionnaire. The second instrument was the epoch, which is measuring adolescent well-being. So when you get to this part, you need to describe what is the format of the survey. Is it using yes or no items, or is it using a Likert scale? What does the Likert scale range from? We can see it's 1 to 5 here. How many items are there in total? There's 20 items. Is it a reliable and valid tool? Yes, it is. And then this person broke down how the 20 items group into different factors. So 4 items group towards engagement, 4 items into perseverance, and so forth. This person included a large flow chart for their data collection procedures, which I think is fine. I think it's a little busy for a PowerPoint, a little too much content. So I would probably do bullet points for the data collection procedures, unless you have a flow chart that doesn't have so much information. Then you go into data analysis procedures, okay? The first thing I would have noted here is what software is being used. So the first bullet point here, I would have said, well, students complete the pre and post, that comes first. But then I would say, the raw data will be uploaded into SPSS or Stata or R, whatever it is. And then you discuss the cleaning of your data and what descriptives are you going to report. So frequency distributions to look at demographics, Cronbach alpha to identify reliability, and then going into the tests of assumptions. As I mentioned in the original presentation here, you don't want to go too in depth for assumptions. I said briefly discuss assumptions. This person really went into a high level of detail about assumptions, which I don't think is really necessary. Your committee's not going to care as much about assumption checking as opposed to what is the actual finding of the analysis. Okay, so they go from 1 to 7 through all the assumptions. And then they discuss the primary analysis. So for this research question, the client planned to use a MANOVA. Okay, so describing the MANOVA, having a definition ready for what a MANOVA is, when it should be used, and then references at the bottom. Okay, so this is a proposal defense. For final defense, it's very similar. This is at a different university, Columbia Southern University. Similar format. The introductory slides are very similar. Okay, so problem statement, purpose statement, theory, research method and design. I think this is a good way to do it. Just put a few words in there, and less text is better. Say quantitative, non-experimental, correlational, and then have talking points to explain each of these components. Population, sampling. Again, we have the power analysis calculation for the minimum. The research questions and hypotheses. Here's the data collection procedures. You can see how it's different than the other example. So this person did the flow chart right here. This massive flow chart, whereas this person just did bullet points. I think this looks better in my opinion. It's easier to read. But yeah, you can see what's important here. Recruitment, consent, who's eligible to participate. So you want to describe inclusion and exclusion criteria. What would prevent someone from qualifying in your study? How long will the survey take? What platform was used? That's really important. SurveyMonkey, Qualtrics. Maybe you're doing data collection on your own. And what are you going to do with the data once you're done with data collection? Okay, then they go into data analysis procedures, uploading into SPSS, creating composite scores, looking at demographics with frequencies and percentages, means and standard deviations for the variables of interest that are numeric, and then checking assumptions. You can see they only mentioned assumptions in a couple spots. So you don't need to go into a high level of detail about that. And then what is the primary test? We are using Spearman correlations here. Then we go into the results. So you can see the entire demographic survey was just copied and pasted for the results. We have a identification of what the sample size is. Then going into descriptives for your variables of interest. This is the assumption check for normality. So this person originally proposed Pearson correlations, and because normality was violated or not supported, they shifted to Spearman correlations instead. So you have to explain that process. Maybe you proposed a particular test initially, but the assumptions were not supported. So you have to shift your approach. Then they go through each of the research questions. What are the findings of those analyses? And they conclude with a definitive statement right here that the null hypothesis was partially rejected. Okay, and then there's a couple more. This is where you bring in your discussion piece. Okay, so after the results, you connect your findings back to the literature. We have implications of the findings. And I would also suggest putting in recommendations for future studies and potentially limitations of your research. If you had, maybe the sample size was a limitation, you couldn't gather enough participants, you want to discuss that in the presentation as well. And then a conclusion, and then a question and answer session. So yeah, that pretty much covers it. For a proposal and final defense, you can see the proposal defense was 24 slides, and the final defense was 21 slides. So between 20 and 30, I think, is a good number to shoot for. And yeah, so if you have any questions, you can type them into the chat box. I do see we have some questions. I think they were comments from Sierra. Do we have any questions about the proposal or final defense, what to present? Yes, Heather, I do typically see reference slides added at the end. I don't think it's absolutely necessary, but in a majority of the presentations I see, there is a reference slide at the end. Thanks for joining, Holly. Appreciate the feedback. Do we have any other questions? We'll send everyone a copy of the PowerPoint as well as the webinar. Very good. Do we have any questions? All right, thanks for joining, everyone. Let us know if you have any questions. Again, you can see what webinars we're doing on the horizon here. See what we have coming up. It looks like June 6th, that'll be next week. I'll be doing a webinar on how to construct quantitative research questions. So come join us for that one. That'll be next Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern. Have a great day. Take care, everyone.